Hey, I'm Andy Kaufman, host of the People and Projects podcast. Here's something I feel like I continue to learn over and over and over, and that is it's not if you are fill in the blank, it's when you are fill in the blank. Huh?
Ooh, when you are. So Andy, tell me about that, man. How does that play out? Give me an example.
Oh yeah. So here's the deal. Sometimes people go, well, I'm introverted, man. I mean, I don't do that stuff because I'm introverted. No. I mean, so I've actually had some guests on the podcast before that will even go so far as to say there's not something as introversion and extroversion, which I think is pretty settled. But this is their point: is you take the most introverted person with their best friend who's highly introverted, doing something they both love. They have extroverted tendencies. And so the reason I even bring this up at all is I think too often we hold ourselves back by saying, well, I'm just not a salesperson, or I'm just not a, and we lock ourselves into these identities and boxes, but it's when we are, because any person has sold before. They just didn't think of themselves as a salesperson at the time, but they were really passionate about an idea. So it's not if you are, it's when you are. And to me, that's freeing. It's like it takes away a bunch of my excuses and explains maybe some of my behavior too. So there we go.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome. I love that. That's almost like the get to versus the got to, which is another important.
Yeah.
Just small distinction, right? Little turn there. And when we think about change, right? Change is not this momentous thing. I mean, certainly we could change everything, but often it's small. And I know that you're an expert in change, Andy. So what does that show up like for you and for your clients? What does change look like, especially now that we're in some fairly uncertain times, man?
Yeah, it's really an interesting question there, Phil, because most of my days, like this morning, I led a session with a group of UN leaders in Europe and in North America, and it's about project management. But you might think, well, project management, that's about process. It's about change. I feel like almost everything that you and I do, and most people are listening to us, that we do to some degree is change management. It's where are they currently and where are we trying to get to? And so when it comes to change management, I guess couple of the biggest things I feel like I've learned out of this whole thing is that it's not really that people don't like change. Offer somebody a $20,000 raise. They can deal with change. It's just that we don't like to have the change foisted upon us. We want autonomy. And so one of the big lessons when it comes to either dealing with change on our own side or trying to lead change with others is there a way that we can provide autonomy or a sense of autonomy, a sense that you have some agency in this whole process? Because when people feel like they're being backed into a corner, that change just isn't going to fly, or at least it won't be sustainable. So I'd say that's one of the big things. I'd say from a personal perspective and from a business owner perspective, the lesson I feel like was not obvious to me early, and it sounds like a cliche, but that there is opportunity in every change. As cliche as that sounds, oh my, there's opportunity in every change. If we're willing to keep an eye out for it, if we're willing to get uncomfortable, if we're willing to listen to voices that don't agree with us and watch trends maybe we're not even happy about, but if we watch for it, there is opportunity in every change.
I love that, man. That's so important, right? I mean, it's like, you have a choice. Is it manure or is it fertilizer?
Yeah.
We have a choice here a lot of times, and to have that power and to give ourselves the sense of autonomy that you talked about there. I really think that's the key. We give ourselves agency, permission to accept or to fight back against the change, right? I mean, we can resist for sure, but for how long and for what reason? Is there a good reason there? So, Andy, when did you start realizing that change was something that you were so passionate about? Was it something foisted upon you, or did someone tell you it, or did you just say, doggone it, I'm going to be a change guy now?
Yeah, I've never gotten to the point, even to this day, I don't think of myself as a change guy. Like there's some people that part of their branding is I lead change management and stuff like that. That's really not a core part of who we are in that sense. But there came a point I started my company in 2001, and it was probably around 2005 or 2006 or so that it became apparent of like, man, it seems like everything we're doing has to do with change. Like I fundamentally believe that everyone's a project manager regardless of your title. Like we have to deliver stuff. Well, we're all change management experts or practitioners, right? I mean, we're all trying to either change ourselves, change our clients, change our employees. So I don't see myself as that, but I realize that that's just a core part of it. And I would say that I don't feel like I was I'm natural at just loving change. Like I don't have 27 pairs of glasses. Okay. I'm pretty much, I've got a blue shirt and like a white shirt and a darker blue shirt. And I got a couple with some stripes, but I'm not like this guy, but about, I don't know, maybe about 20 years ago, I started just being a little bit more like, hey, let's take a different way to that restaurant. And it'd drive my kids crazy. They'd be like, Dad, this isn't the right way. I'm like, I know. But all of a sudden we try something new. I do, and I think that just makes me human, not special, but I just like novelty in that regard. And so it's by if nothing else, if we can increase our appetite for that, it's going to have all these residual benefits, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and some of that, it's force feeding. It's almost like, Brussels sprouts. The first time I had them, I remember I was in kindergarten. I was like, yeah, I don't like these so much. And then I realized I'm really hungry.
Right.
So I'm going to eat more Brussels sprouts because nobody else liked them either.
Yeah.
And now they're my favorite vegetable, like fast forward 40 years.
Yeah.
But at first I resisted.
Yeah.
I resisted and I didn't do that. Much like taking a different way home or a different way to the restaurant, or even, I've seen some people, right? They talk about brush your teeth differently or use the fork differently, right? Because I'm a righty, I'm totally right-handed. But yeah, do something different. Yeah. So that's really interesting. So do your kids, like, are they okay with this now? I mean, 20 years, man, they're older. They probably are driving themselves to the restaurant. Or are they like, no way, man, Dad made us change, so now we're going to be the same?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because everyone is different. So it is kind of funny to see that. But I think probably the biggest gift that has maybe given them is just being open to there is another way. And I've seen it in the older ones, and the youngest ones are 11 and 9. We've got 5 kids, and I'll say that being willing to try to look at things from different angles is just one of the many gifts parents can give kids. And I feel like they've got it so far. Like they so far, it doesn't feel like they're just like mini me's, or they are willing to wrestle with the gray. Like I love paradox. I love the I don't know. You and I are in an industry where it's very easy to have simple answers to complex problems, but I like on LinkedIn, I post quotes almost every day, and I love when people disagree with the quotes because I rarely post a quote that I really fully agree with, because it's not if the quote is right, it's when the quote is right. So like, how can we adjust it and apply it, but also disagree with it? That's versions of change, right? It's being willing to see things differently. So we'll see. Time will tell with them, and time will tell with you and I, of how well we continue to keep willing to look at different things. But here's the deal. Gary Hamel, he just released a book called The Humanocracy, and Gary's always in the top 50 of the Thinkers 50. And he says the future is more opaque than what we think, and that if we really pay attention, we don't always have to get blindsided by change. I mean, pandemics, yeah, maybe, but still there's been talk about there's going to be something big eventually, and so getting complacent to any degree is really dangerous. So trying to institutionalize or trying to find ways, like a forcing function, to keep confronting different ways of looking at things or new learning or something like that. That is whether it's for the kids or whether for me, I got to tell you, that's a big part of who I've become over the years.
That's beautiful, man. I love that. And you mentioned Gary Hamel, right? Rohit Bhargava often would do his non-obvious trends, which if we're looking for change, we'll find it. And if we're not, or when we're not, to use your words, right? When we don't, well, funny enough, we don't see it, right? So I love that we have to embrace that, or we have an opportunity to embrace that in all that we do. And I love that you mentioned someone that isn't you as a good quote about something. And I say that because I really think that one of the things that I love most about you, Andy, is your willingness to learn from all angles. And your podcast, man, holy crap, dude. I mean, the fact that Jim Kouzes says, I've done a whole lot of interviews, and without a doubt, yours are the best. Now, That's pretty awesome praise. And I'm wondering, why hasn't he been on my podcast? That's really the question I want, because
Well,
that's what I want to know. No,
there
I'm
was
just
a day
kidding.
when he wasn't on mine either. So and Jim, to be fair, is a very gracious and generous person, and so he might tell you that same thing to you too. I don't know, but it's one of those things where that is just the type of guy that he is, very generous in that regard.
Yeah. So why'd you start podcasting, man? I have to understand this, because project managers,
Yeah.
podcasting. I don't know, Andy. Talk to me, man. How'd you get started?
So I started mine in 2009, and I'm sure episode 1 was listened to probably by my parents and maybe my wife. But in 2009, it really wasn't obvious what podcasts were for a lot of people. So I had a page on the podcast site that was like, what's a podcast? How do you listen to podcasts? So it is kind of funny, but here's the genesis. With very little vision, I was approached by a guy who had a podcast. He goes, "Hey, can I interview you?" I'm like, "Sure," because I just wanted to learn more about it, and I like the guy. And after we were done with the interview, I was like, "All right, so tell me more about this. Like, how does this all work?" And I'm a geek at heart, Phil. I mean, I grew up as a software developer, so I love technology, and I'm like, I can do this. And so I just, with very little vision for what it's going to be. My first episode was just me talking. And after a while, I'm like, no, I don't like that idea. I don't like that idea, because there's only so much that I know. And so it's like, all right, who would be some people? And the first 5 episodes of any podcast, piece of cake, man. And then all of a sudden the next 5 is like, oh, and at some point you're like, oh, now what do I do? And so the easiest thing is to start a podcast, truthfully. The most difficult thing is to keep it going. But the vision at the beginning was, how can I have an excuse to talk with some people that I deeply admire, okay, and learn from them and kind of bring that to an audience. And although most of our listeners are project managers, I just got a message this last week from somebody. It's some sort of MBA program. It's nothing to do with projects or anything like that, but it's on their recommended list of podcasts. And we're on the top 40 all time of Apple's management podcasts. So that's not just project managers. So I think there's just a hunger for, how do we deliver? How do we lead teams? And, so that's the niche that we're in. How do we deliver? How do we lead?
I love that. I enjoy it. And I think, peopleinprojectspodcast.com is a place where folks can get fed with that. And of course, anywhere else podcasts are. But I think it's so interesting that you didn't have a vision so many years ago. I mean, I would agree with you, right? I mean, this is Conversation with Phil, and it's me, you, and Mom that listen to the show, right? And my sweetheart listens. She loves the show too. I think just because she loves to listen to my voice. So for that, right? But
good taste.
It's always, I guess, huh? Yeah, but it's always interesting how that happens, because I think it is about a hunger for learning and a hunger for sharing other people's smarts, right? Because Gary Hamel, you've gotten just lots of great people. Bob Cialdini was on, which is absolutely fantastic. I mean, just lots and lots of cool stuff that's happened there, Andy. So what's been the toughest interview or conversation that you've had? And you don't have to call it the guest, but just talk about why it was hard, because I know sometimes it is hard to pull stuff out of a guest.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was 2, and neither of them ever got published. And I can think of only 3 over the years that have not gotten published, but this one person, he had really worked hard to get on. So he wasn't an author, but he just really wanted to get on. And I like the guy. I think he's got some interesting insights, and he's a contrarian in many ways. So I always like kind of provocative thinkers, and I'm pretty sure the dude was drunk. I mean, he was out of control. Like, I'd ask a question, and it was like,
he was drunk. Wow, that's quite a guess.
Well, and I was trying to kind of bring him in. The whole goal is to make the guest look good, right? That's the whole deal. And I'm telling you, Phil, I could not get this guy around. And so finally, I'm like, all right. By the way, this is edited, so I need you to answer the question. So real quick, I'll give you another shot at it. But woo! And he even said that I don't want to give too much away, so he'll know maybe who it is. But he goes, there was a problem with the public water system, and so he goes, I've been drinking tequila instead. And so I think he was
no kidding.
He was well hydrated. I'll just say it that way. So, yeah. but the other one that comes to mind is somebody I just really, really like, but they wouldn't answer the question. It's almost like they had this, sometimes politicians are asked this question, but they answer this question. But this is not about politics. I mean, this is like their book was really good and they weren't answering the questions about their book. And so it just, I feel no pressure to actually publish an episode if it feels like it's not going to be of value. Right. So,
yeah.
But anyway, those are very few and far between, those sorts of things.
No, I totally agree. I'm trying to think. I think I've had one or two where I was like, wow, this person was really bad. And then I've lost a couple of episodes accidentally. Those always make me feel the worst of anything, right? It's like, oh my gosh, either I forgot to hit record or worse than that, I recorded, I edited, and then I can't find it on file. And I seldom edit, right? But I really, I know that, one person in particular, I lost Scott Stratton's interview. And I have mad respect for Scott, really smart guy, unmarketing.com, really nice guy. And I lost his MP3. I'm like,
hey, Scott.
Yeah. Hey, bud. Yeah. So, and of course, right, it's lined up for his book launch and stuff. And I'm like, oh, geez. Yeah, no good, man. No good. So unhelpful Phil right here.
There's a book that came out years ago called Choke. And it's a book about like what is it causes people to choke. Well, I was interviewing the author, and there was technology problems like 3 times during the interview. I'm like, oh great, I'm choking while I'm interviewing this author who wrote a book called Choke. The irony was just perfect. And
that is funny.
But I guess it's one of those things where we have to deal with what we got, but it's the self-inflicted ones that as a podcaster that hurt the most, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked about change, right? We talked about podcasting, but let's talk a little bit more about leadership, Andy, because we did talk about change and how that works. But leadership is it different now, do you think, or is it the same now as it's always been? Because I hear conflicting stories. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a very good point. Like as with a lot of things, there's not one pure definition of what it means. So you mentioned Jim Cousins before. He and his writing partner, Barry Posner, they've got their definition of leadership. And you read it and you go, that's good. I mean, it's basically, they say it much more eloquently, but there's a hill. This is how we're going to go take it. And how do we engage people to get along the way? I mean, you can't argue with their definition, but you talk to like Frances Fry at Harvard, and she would say that what leadership is unleashing the people around us. And she would add, because of our presence, but also because of our absence, or it continues even into our absence, which means they're not only good when we're and performing well when we're involved, but years afterwards, that we help set them on a trajectory. And so everyone's got this nuance to it and this different angle, which I think is actually good, because if there's just one definition, it wouldn't cover it all, because what does it mean in that context with a platoon compared to, my family compared to, so there's lots of different contexts. But so is it different? I'm not so sure it's actually different. I think there's a lot more voices to it. I think there's a lot more ways to look at it. But one of my favorite definitions is from a guy who wrote a book called, I think it's Better Under Pressure. I think that was the name of it. And it wasn't even a main point in his book, but it was along the lines of when there's pressure, like he gets called in a lot of times when someone's struggling and he gets to make the call. Are they savable or are they not savable? Which is intriguing role to have. But his definition of leadership was maximizing potential. So maximizing potential in ourselves and in the people around us. I love that, Phil, because not everybody has the same potential. As humans, we have the potential, but some people don't want to grow in their career. They don't want to. They just, I'm happy doing this, and to put them there, they'd be miserable. Yeah, but for what they want, and even maybe more than they realize they can you and I draw it out of them? In Francis's term, can we unleash it? Because maybe it's leashed, right? It's being held in there. Is there a way that we can kind of tap into that? But it's difficult to do that for other people if we're not doing that ourselves. Are we maximizing our own potential? Are we growing and forcing all that? So I think, as much as I love the leadership space, an episode that's it'll be 5 episodes from now, from what our current published is. She drops the F word in her book, follower. That too many of us are so focused on leadership that we don't learn how to become a good follower. And I think there's something to that, because we all have bosses to one degree or another. We have, whether if we're independent business owners, or maybe to some degree our customers are bosses, but we need to learn how to follow well and to manage up and to influence. And so I think the world of leadership is, there's probably wings of libraries, with books and ideas, but it's something that we never really arrive at. We have to become good followers, have to become good leaders in lots of different contexts, and to lead well in this organization could be different than leading well in this organization because of the cultural differences. So I love the space, because for me, it's like golf or baking. Like, you're going to have some good holes, you're going to burn some dishes. Right. And so it's just, are we getting better? And that's that. I think that's a good endeavor for us. How can we get better at influencing people around us and growing ourselves?
Ooh. So let's unpack that, right? So learn to follow well, I think I love that. I think that is really important, right? And instead of be the leader that we always want to have, be the follower
right.
that we always wanted to be led by. Yeah. I think that's great advice. I love that you call it an art instead of a science, which I think is super duper true, because it's not just the organizational culture. I think we have to remember also the organizational resources. Yeah. Right. I knew one executive VP, Andy, who he was so self-unaware. He would keep trying to delegate stuff down and then realized there's nobody underneath him. Like, he doesn't have an assistant. He doesn't have a team of a cadre of 7 people that are going to do the work for him, that he had to book his own appointments, that he had to do his own slides. Right. So I thought that was, so leadership matters, right? The container, if you will, right? Our resources matter. And then I think the other thing that you said is that we have to lead ourselves first. Yeah. And I think that's so powerful, man. That's so powerful.
And it's humbling, right? It's humbling. It's inspiring. I think when this was not a guest, it was a more on the client side, but they said it this way: it's like, it'd be like the equivalent of, Phil, you and I cast a far longer shadow than what we realize. And so we're leading, even though we don't realize we're leading. Like, what the jokes we laugh at, the behavior that we tolerate, and we, I can, if I'm not thinking of any particular child at this point, but if I'm like, man, I can't believe they're acting like that, there's probably more of a reflection of me in that than what I want to believe. And the same thing can be happening at work. So it's that's why I feel like it's such a noble endeavor. Like, how can we make people's lives better? How can we grow people's skills so it's not just another day at the salt mine? It's like, how can we find ways to put joy into work and deliver things that matter? It's leadership and followership are all part of that formula, and that's fun. It's fun doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's fun to help people find their joy. Yeah. It's fun helping people realize that it's when, not if, and it's really fun to help them wrestle with the gray. Some of those wonderful things that you shared with us today, Andy. If you were to give us one more piece of advice to get started on our own change journey, our own leadership journey, our own followership journey, what would it be?
There's all kinds of things that come to mind, but how about this? There's a former Harvard researcher named David McClelland he wrote a book called Human Motivation. So if I had a copy of the book, it'd be like this thick, but if you try to read it, it's like this thick. It's a very academic treatment on motivation. But one of the ideas in the book is that you and I and those listening to us are most motivated if we only have a 50 to 70% likelihood of success. So think about that. So Phil, when you started the podcast, or before you say yes to a prospect who's looking to sign, but before you actually close the deal, what percent of likelihood of success do you deep down want to have before you say, let's do this?
Oh yeah, sure. Halfway, right? I want to be about halfway there. Maybe 70% of the way there. I don't want to know that it's going to fail. Yeah, that's right. For sure. Or have no chance, because that's like, But if it's 100%, it's like, oh, slam dunk. I don't care, right? Doesn't matter. not real motivated.
I don't think you're normal. And I mean that in the best sort of way. I think what most people go is, Phil, listen, I'm not going to reach out to that person unless I know I'm good, because I think you help a lot with people selling and stuff. Like, well, listen, they're just going to say no. They're just going to say no. Well, did you try?
Yeah.
I actually, one of my favorite book titles of a guest was the whole book is in her title. She goes, "You already have the no." You already have the no. So we don't do something because they're going to say no. Well, you already have the no, so make the ask. And if they say no, you're in no different place. And I think too many of us want 100% likelihood of success. Otherwise, we stay back on the margins. I'm not going to start that podcast. I'm not going to start the business. I'm not going to reach out. I'm not going to create this new thing. I'm not going to investigate new technology because you know what? I'm just not that. I'm just not that or whatever. And like you said, if you have 100% likelihood of success, it's just slam dunk. It's not motivating. It's like another day of making the donuts, man. Just another day. That's not motivating. But 50, if it's less than 50, like you said, it's like start the death march, but it's not going to be, it's not going to end well. But the 50 to 70, I'm still more comfortable with the 70, like you said, than I am the 50. But I've taken on engagements that were not 100% likelihood of success, just because of that idea from McClellan. And I think if everyone listening to us can say, hey, you know what? I don't have 100% likelihood of success in this, but I got a 50-50. Do it. I have far more regrets, Phil, about the things I didn't do than those that I did and ended up not happening, not being as successful as I did. So 50 to 70, if it's uncomfortable, it can be anxiety, laden, but use that as the motivation to lean into it. And, I've been in business for, it's getting close to 20 years. And I don't have trouble waking up in the morning because I'm like, you never arrive. You never arrive. So it's like, hey, and if I've got 100, if I'm only doing stuff with 100% likelihood of success, I am not stretching and I won't be around a year or two from now because the next disruption will smack me upside the head. So learn to get a little bit more comfortable in the 50 to 70, which is easier to say than do. But if you force yourself, say yes to some things where like, all right, say yes. And it's amazing opportunities that can come from that.
I love that, man. That's a great advice to wrap us up here. 50 to 70%. So if it's a coin flip, get motivated. Give it a try. If it's a little better, even better. But don't forget to surround yourself with people who can help you. Listen to smart people like Andy Kaufman. Check out the People and Projects podcast.com. Search for Andy Kaufman People and Projects podcast on your favorite place to listen. And Andy, you're a gift, man. I really appreciate you spending some time today. I learned so much, dude. You're the bomb.
Actually, I got to tell you, if somebody's listening to this and you don't follow Phil on LinkedIn, you're missing because these episodes are good and they're helpful and listen to them, but follow on the daily stuff that Phil's delivering, serving up content that is, I think, clever and just outright fun. And so follow that guy right there.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate you. The check is in the mail, my friend. I appreciate you so much. People and Projects podcast. Check it out. Get to know my friend and now yours, Andy Kaufman.